John Lennon invited a homeless man into his house who was stalking him. The result was shocking. Tittenhurst Park, Ascot, Berkshire, November 1970. The sprawling Georgian estate, once a haven of peace, now felt like a gilded cage. John Lennon, fresh from the raw, primal scream therapy of Plastic Ono Band, was trying to find a new normal. He and Yoko had retreated from the chaos of London, seeking solace in the quiet countryside. But the quiet was often broken by the whispers of the wind, by the rustle of leaves, and by something far more unsettling: a presence. For weeks, John had felt it, a shadow at the edge of his vision, a figure lurking beyond the gates, a car parked too long down the lane. He dismissed it at first. Paranoia, the price of fame. Everyone was always watching John Lennon. But this was different. This felt personal, persistent. One cold, damp November evening, as John walked back from the studio he'd built on the estate, he saw him, a man, gaunt, disheveled, standing motionless by the main gate, staring intently at the house. John stopped. The man didn't move, just watched. It wasn't a fan seeking an autograph. It wasn't a journalist. This was something else, something darker. John felt a chill that had nothing to do with the biting wind. He walked closer to the gate. The man didn't flinch. His eyes, sunken and hollow, were fixed on John. "Can I help you, mate?" John called out, his voice sharper than he intended. The man remained silent, just stared. John felt a surge of anger, and something else, a strange, unsettling recognition. Because in the man's eyes, John saw a reflection of a loneliness he knew intimately, a desperation that cut deeper than any celebrity adoration. "Are you all right?" John tried again, softening his tone. Still no response, just the silent, unwavering gaze. John stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping into his bones, the man's silence echoing in the vast, empty space between them. And then, against all logic, against every security protocol, against every instinct for self-preservation, John Lennon did something shocking. He opened the gate. "Come on in," John said, his voice quiet but firm. "You look like you could use a cup of tea." The man followed John into the warmth of Tittenhurst Park, his movements slow, almost spectral. Yoko Ono, who had been waiting for John, looked up, surprised and alarmed, as John walked in with a stranger, a homeless man by the look of him. "John, who is this?" Yoko asked, her voice tight with concern. "He was outside," John said simply. He looked cold. The man stood in the opulent living room, a stark contrast to his ragged clothes and dirt-stained face. He didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, just stood there, radiating a profound weariness. John offered him a seat by the roaring fire. Yoko, ever gracious despite her apprehension, brought him a mug of hot tea and a plate of biscuits. The man took the tea, his hands trembling slightly, but still said nothing. "What's your name, mate?" John asked, sitting opposite him. A long silence. Then a raspy whisper. "Arthur." "Arthur," John repeated. "Where are you from, Arthur?" Another pause. "Liverpool." John felt a jolt. Liverpool, his city, the city he'd left behind, but that still clung to him like a second skin. What brings you all the way out here, Arthur?" John asked, his voice softer now. Arthur finally looked at John. His eyes, though still hollow, held a flicker of something: recognition, pain. "I came to see you," Arthur whispered. "I needed to see you." "Why?" Because you understand. You know what it's like to be alone, to be lost." John stared at Arthur. He saw not a stalker, not a threat, but a reflection, a ghost from his own past. the lonely boy from Mendips, abandoned by his parents, struggling to find his place in the world. He saw the raw, unvarnished pain that he had just poured into Plastic Ono Band. The album was a scream of primal wounds, of abandonment, of a desperate search for connection. And here, sitting in his living room, was a living embodiment of that very pain. "I'm not alone, Arthur," John said, and gesturing to Yoko, "I have Yoko. I have my son." "But you were," Arthur insisted. "You sang about it, about being a working-class hero, about being nobody. That's me. I'm nobody." John felt a chill. This wasn't just a fan. This was someone who saw into his soul, someone who understood the darkness he often tried to hide. "Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact." As the night deepened, Arthur slowly began to talk. His story was a familiar one in post-war Britain. A working-class man. Lost his job on the docks, wife left him, kids grew up and moved away. He drifted, ended up on the streets of London. "I heard your songs," Arthur said, his voice gaining a little strength. "The new ones. They sounded like me, like what I felt inside." He spoke of the crushing weight of invisibility, of feeling like a ghost in a city that didn't care, of the desperate need for someone, anyone, to acknowledge his existence. "I just wanted to see you," Arthur confessed, "to know that someone like you, someone famous, understood what it was like to be nothing." John listened, near his face unreadable. He saw the raw, exposed nerve of Arthur's pain, and he recognized it. He remembered his own feelings of worthlessness, of being an outsider, even at the height of Beatlemania, the pressure to be someone he wasn't, the constant performance. "You're not nothing, Arthur," John said quietly. "Nobody's nothing." "Then why does it feel like it?" "Because the world tries to make you feel that way. It tries to put you in a box, to tell you who you are, but you don't have to listen." Yoko, who had been observing quietly, spoke up. "John understands this, Arthur. He has fought against it his whole life." Arthur looked at Yoko, then back at John. "But you're rich. You're famous. You have everything." "And I still feel lost sometimes," John admitted. "Still feel like I'm fighting to be heard. I still feel like I'm trying to figure out who the hell I am." The confession hung in the air. The rock star, the icon, admitting his own vulnerability to a homeless stranger. Arthur stared into the fire, processing this. The man he had idealized, the voice that had given him comfort, was not so different from him after all. "I don't know what to do," Arthur whispered. "I don't have anywhere to go." John looked at Yoko. She met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "You can stay here tonight, Arthur," John said. "Get some sleep. We'll figure things out in the morning." Arthur slept in a guest room, the first warm bed he'd had in months. John and Yoko stayed up late, talking. "He's not dangerous, John," Yoko said. "He's just broken." "I know," John replied. "I saw myself in him, Yoko. The fear, the loneliness. It's the feeling that nobody gives a damn." He walked to the window, looking out at the dark, silent grounds. "I've been screaming about my pain on this new album. And then this man shows up, a living embodiment of that pain, and I almost turned him away. Yoko put a hand on his arm. But you didn't. You invited him in. That's what matters. The next morning, Arthur woke up to the smell of coffee and toast. He came downstairs, looking slightly less disheveled, but still wary. John and Yoko were at the breakfast table. "Morning, Arthur," John said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Sleep well?" "Yes, Mr. Lennon, thank you." "Just John, mate. No need for formalities." Over breakfast, John and Yoko began to ask Arthur about his life. Not just his struggles, but his dreams, his skills, what he used to do before he lost everything. Arthur, who initially hesitant, slowly opened up. He spoke of his days as a skilled carpenter on the docks, of his love for building things with his hands, of the pride he took in his work. "I haven't done anything like that in years," Arthur said, a shadow passing over his face. "No one wants a man like me." "That's rubbish," John said. "Everyone wants a man who knows how to build things, especially me." Arthur looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I've got this studio out back," John explained. "It's good, but it needs work. Soundproofing, some custom shelving, a few other bits and bobs. I've been meaning to hire someone." Arthur stared at him, disbelief dawning in his eyes. "You want me to work for you?" "If you're up to it," John said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "It's not exactly building ships, but it's honest work. It pays." Arthur was speechless. The rock star, who had been stalked by a homeless man, was now offering him a job. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Yoko said, smiling warmly. "Say yes, Arthur." Arthur said yes. He started working in John's studio the very next day. Initially, he was quiet, reserved, still carrying the weight of his past. But as he began to work with his hands, as he saw the tangible results of his skill, something began to change. He built custom acoustic panels. He designed and installed intricate shelving for John's growing collection of instruments and recording equipment. He repaired broken furniture. He worked with a quiet intensity, his hands, once trembling, now steady and purposeful. John would often come into the studio, not to supervise, but to watch, to talk, to listen. He saw the transformation in Arthur, the light returning to his eyes, the subtle straightening of his shoulders, the quiet pride in his work. "You're a bloody genius, Arthur," John said one afternoon, admiring a newly built console stand. "This is better than anything I could have bought." Arthur actually smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. "Just doing my job, John." But it was more than a job. It was a lifeline, a purpose, a chance to rebuild not just a studio, but a life. Yoko, too, noticed the change. She would bring Arthur tea and biscuits, chatting with him about his day, treating him with the same respect she showed anyone else. The security guards, initially suspicious of Arthur, now greeted him warmly. He was no longer the anonymous shadow at the gate. He was Arthur, the carpenter, the quiet, skilled man who was helping John Lennon build his musical sanctuary. The studio itself seemed to transform under Arthur's touch. It became more than just a recording space. It became a place of creation, of healing, of unexpected connection. John, working on new music, found himself inspired by Arthur's quiet resilience. The raw pain of plastic ono band began to soften, making way for a new kind of hope. He had invited a homeless man into his house who was stalking him, and the result was shocking, not because of danger or betrayal, but because of unexpected redemption. Arthur worked at Tittenhurst Park for nearly a year. He became an indispensable part of the household, a quiet, respected presence. He never overstayed his welcome, never asked for more than he earned. He saved his money. He bought new clothes. He started to look like a different man entirely. The gauntness faded. The hollow eyes filled with a quiet dignity. One crisp autumn morning, Arthur approached John. "John," he said, his voice steady, "I think it's time." John knew what he meant. "Time for what, Arthur?" "Time for me to go, to start my own life again. I've saved enough. I've found a small place in Liverpool. I want to go home." John felt a pang of sadness. He had grown fond of Arthur, but he also felt a profound sense of pride. "You've done good, Arthur," John said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Really good." "You saved me, John," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Yoko. You gave me a second chance when no one else would." "You saved yourself, mate," John replied. "We just opened the door." Arthur packed his few belongings. He shook John's hand. He hugged Yoko. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for everything." Then he walked out of Tittenhurst Park, not as a shadow, but as a man reborn. He returned to Liverpool. He bought a small workshop. He started his own carpentry business. He never spoke publicly about his time with John Lennon. It was too personal, too sacred. But he never forgot the kindness that had pulled him back from the brink. And John Lennon never forgot Arthur, the man who had stalked him, the man who had shown him that even in the darkest corners of human despair, there was always a flicker of hope. The story of Arthur, the homeless man John Lennon invited into his home, remained a private anecdote for decades. It was never sensationalized, never became a tabloid headline. But those close to John and Yoko knew it, and they understood its profound significance. "John had a tough exterior," Yoko Ono said in a rare interview about the incident. "But he had a very soft heart. He understood pain, and when he saw it in Arthur, he couldn't turn away." Arthur's carpentry business in Liverpool thrived. He became a respected member of his community. He never sought fame or recognition, content with his quiet, rebuilt life. When John Lennon was murdered in 1980, Arthur closed his workshop for a week. He mourned the man who had seen past his despair and offered him a hand up. "He didn't know he was saving me," Arthur told a close friend years later. "He just thought he was offering a cup of tea, but that cup of tea changed everything." The story of John Lennon and Arthur reminds us that even the most famous among us can find connection in the most unexpected places, that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't fighting a battle, but opening a door. That compassion, extended to a stranger, can be a revolutionary act. John Lennon invited a homeless man into his house who was stalking him, and the result was shocking, not because of the danger averted, but because of the humanity revealed. Because in that act of kindness, John Lennon didn't just save a man, he saved a piece of himself, the part that believed in connection, in empathy, in the power of seeing the human behind the shadow. The gate at Tittenhurst Park still stands, a symbol of privacy, of protection. But for one cold November night, it opened, and a rock star, grappling with his own demons, found an unexpected reflection, a reminder that sometimes the greatest security isn't in keeping people out, it's in letting them in. The end. If this story about compassion, unexpected connection, and the power of seeing the humanity in everyone moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that kindness can change lives, both for the giver and the receiver. What unexpected encounter taught you the most about empathy? Tell us in the comments below.